Right. So lately I have been avoiding working on things that I really should be working on by doom scrolling conspiracy theories on Twitter. It's hardly the most productive thing, but I did come across something interesting, so I figured, why not make a video on it? Now, you may have actually heard of this one before, especially if you spent any amount of time perusing the more, neurotic corners of the internet, especially since this theory has been gaining a bit more traction and attention ever since the United States government formally launched an investigation into it. It is a story that spans the continental United States and many people and government agencies, with theories and explanations that run the gamut from clandestine government operations to time-traveling aliens somehow. So, today, we are going to be talking about the unusual circumstances and supposed links behind the deaths and disappearances of several prominent US scientists. So if that interests you, stick around, right? Now, the theory goes that scientists within very specific fields, particularly those related to space, propulsion systems, and some say aliens, have either gone missing or have died under improbable or doubtful circumstances, the majority of which have occurred within the last few years. And naturally, this has led to those of the more, conspiratorial cloth to declare this the result of some manipulation or concerted effort from any number of sources, with the desired end result being to suppress some sort of secret research. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the main names that are frequently tied to this idea. First on the list, we have Michael David Hicks. He was a NASA researcher who passed on July 30th, 2023, and while his cause of death was never disclosed, he is considered by many to be one of the first in this sequence of deaths and disappearances, and this is likely due to the fact that the projects that he worked on relate to this alleged overarching connection, specifically that of space observation. He was part of the DART project, which tested whether it would be possible to redirect asteroid trajectories, NEAT, which tracks near-Earth celestial objects, and the Dawn and Deep Space One missions, both of which related to observations of smaller celestial bodies. Next, we have Frank Maywalt, another NASA researcher who passed on July 4th, 2024, and as with Hicks, his cause of death was never disclosed. Now, this one I'm not 100% sure about, because while Maywalt did work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, from what I can tell, most of his projects seem to have been focused more towards ocean topography and imaging spectroscopy as opposed to actually, building rockets. After him, we have Anthony Chavez. Now, this guy didn't actually die, at least as far as we know. A former employee of the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, on May 8th, 2025, Chavez left his house in the Denver Steeles area and has not been heard from since. His car was still locked in the driveway and his wallet and keys had been left at home. And additionally, there were no signs of violence at his house, and when cadaver dogs were utilized, they came back negative. It is as if one day he just opted to walk out his door and vanish without a trace, which is a pattern that you're going to see a fair number of times throughout these cases. For example, with Melissa Cassius. Cassius and her husband also worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and on June 26, 2025, she dropped off her husband at work and, having allegedly forgot her ID badge, decided to return home and work remotely. Several hours later, she was picked up on a security camera wearing a backpack and walking eastbound on the highway 3 miles from their home, and to date has not been found. Strangely enough, both her work and personal phone had been left at home and completely factory reset, which would imply that this was very much intentional on her part. And there is an update to this, actually. So this information actually came out right after I had finished writing the script, so I'm just going to go ahead and tack it on at the end of this part. But as of May 28th, 2026, Cassius's whereabouts have actually been confirmed, with her body having been found in Carson National Forest. For reference, this is where she lived, this is where she was last seen, and this is where her remains were found, about 15 miles away. And I would like to reiterate, she was last seen on foot, right? Additionally, a handgun was found alongside her body, though her family rejects any claims of suicide, with some relatives believing foul play instead to be involved. And as if all of that wasn't odd enough, Thomas McNally, a private investigator who had been working with the Cassius' family, stated, "You don't need to be a hunter, scientist, or a cop to know that a human body is not going to be left out in the elements and be undisturbed a year later." So really, it's just a very odd case all around. Next is Steven Garcia, yet another case of someone just walking out of their house and vanishing. Garcia was a government contractor with top-level security clearance at the Kansas City National Security Campus, a facility that is responsible for producing 80% of the non-nuclear components for the US military's nuclear arsenal. On August 28, 2025, Garcia left his home on foot carrying only a water bottle and a handgun and is yet to be found. And after him, we have Joshua LeBlanc. LeBlanc was a nuclear propulsion engineer for the NASA at the Marshall Space Flight Center and had been reporting missing back in July 2025, and like many of the other people in this list, had seemingly left without taking the necessities, leaving his wallet, phone, and pet dog alone at home. He was later found in the burnt wreckage of his Tesla near Huntsville, Alabama. Jason Thomas. Now, after reading into this one, I'm not entirely convinced that it's related at all. Like, yes, he did go missing, and yes, he was eventually found dead, but the circumstances described by his wife leading up to the initial disappearance point more to an incredibly distressed and depressed man who was not in a stable frame of mind than a victim of nefarious intent. Nevertheless, his name keeps making the list whenever I see it brought up, so I will just briefly go over it. On December 12, 2025, Thomas, a biomedical researcher, left his home, leaving his smartwatch, phone, and wallet behind and disappeared. Though the police were promptly informed of a missing person, he was not found until March 17, 2026, when the Wakefield Chief of Police confirmed that a body found in Lake Conepauet was that of the missing man. Thomas's wife had mentioned that he was struggling with the death of his parents, both of whom had passed within an hour of each other the day before his disappearance. That, plus the fact that Thomas's field of expertise doesn't really line up with the overall pattern, makes me believe that this case probably isn't really involved. Nevertheless, there are instances that this entire thing, Thomas's death, as well as the death of his parents, was orchestrated by someone for some reason, and I'd be remiss to not at least address it. Next is Nuno Loureiro. So he didn't actually go missing, he was just straight up murdered, right? Loureiro was a professor and the director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, and on December 16, 2025, he was fatally shot in the foyer of his apartment building by Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, who also happened to be the lone suspect of the Brown University shooting 2 days prior. Valente was later found dead due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And similarly, Carl Grillmer was a Caltech scientist whose work consisted of exoplanet imaging, analyzing stellar streams, and the observation of near-Earth objects, which is to say, again, observation systems. And on February 16, 2026, Grillmer was shot on his front porch in Llano, an unincorporated community in Southern California. The thing is, Grillmer essentially lived in the middle of nowhere, with his murderer, Freddie Schneider, having had to travel 2 miles to make it to his home in the first place. Now, Grillmer's wife rejected the conspiracy theory claim, stating that Schneider had come into conflict with Grillmer at least twice prior to the final shooting. However, with both Grillmer and Loureiro, there are some who insist that these murderers had been plants or were otherwise influenced in some manner and that these killings were actually targeted. So, up until now, these have been in mostly chronological order based on the date of each respective incident. However, I did save a few for last since they seem most pertinent and are fairly high profile. So we're going to go ahead and start with Monica Jacinto Reza and William Neal McCasland. Now, there's a bit of a gap between these two with 8 months between their respective disappearances. However, they are pretty closely linked, so I kept them together. Reza was a metallurgist and materials engineer who invented Mondelloy, a superalloy that is most commonly used in rocket engines. And in 1999, she collaborated with the Air Force Research Laboratory in order to scale up production. In terms of her disappearance, on June 22, 2025, Reza was hiking with a friend in the Angeles National Forest, waved to him from what he claimed to be 30 feet away, though photographic evidence and later reports vary, and when he turned around again, she had just vanished completely. Now, rescue efforts were immediately brought up and included thermal imaging sweeps, pixel matching programs, drones, and search dogs, all to no avail. The imaging systems kept hitting false positives, and the only things the dogs found were her beanie. Beyond that, the scent trail went completely cold. Now, naturally, you would look at this and say maybe she just fell off a cliff or something, but that doesn't really account for the fact that no body was ever found despite the dogs, and there was no sign of violence or animals taking away the corpse or even, her clothes or other personal belongings that wouldn't have been eaten. So as far as we know, she just kind of vanished without a trace. The second person in this pair, William Neal McCasland, is probably also the highest profile name on this list. McCasland was an astronautical engineer, a retired U.S. Air Force Major General, and the former commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory, the same Air Force Research Laboratory that had collaborated with Reza in order to mass-produce Mondelloy. In fact, Reza's mentor and co-inventor, Dallas Hardwick, had been a civilian scientist with the AFRL under McCasland's command prior. Additionally, McCasland has had alleged ties to UFOs as well. In 2016, when the Clinton campaign emails were leaked, McCasland was named in a correspondence between the Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta and former Blink-182 founder Tom DeLonge. The leaked email reads, "He is very, very aware, as he was in charge of all of this stuff. When Roswell crashed, they shipped it to the laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. General McCasland was in charge of that exact laboratory up till a couple years ago. He is a very important man." And you could just look at this and say that maybe DeLonge is just saying shit, right? Until you get to another leaked email sent from McCasland himself, seemingly confirming this meeting. I don't really know what to say to that, really. We somehow went from a vanished general to UFOs and leaked campaign emails to, I guess, the former frontman of Blink-182 rubbing shoulders with some very powerful people. So I'm not really sure how that happens. Regardless, McCasland also has an alleged link to J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who led Project Blue Book via an AFRL scientist, Michael Duggan. And for those of you who don't know, Project Blue Book was the code name for the Air Force's study of unidentified flying objects from 1952 to 1969. Now, according to his wife, on February 26, 2026, McCasland left his home without his phone or his watch and simply vanished, with an unconfirmed sighting placing him at the Whitewash Trailhead in Piedralisa Canyon. And that's all we know. Despite the massive ongoing search, including even the FBI, William Neal McCasland is still yet to be found. But that's going to be it for those two. And finally, we come to our last and perhaps the most perplexing name on this list, and also the one that threw me down this rabbit hole to begin with. Chronologically, she is often cited as the first in this string of incidents, Amy Escridge. Now, Escridge was the president of the Institute for Exotic Sciences in Huntsville, Alabama, with her primary field of research being anti-gravity and anti-gravity propulsion systems. And Escridge is a bit of an interesting case, because not only did she claim to have been targeted for a while prior to her death, but she also left behind a trail of documentation leading up to her passing. The official reports claim that Escridge died to a self-inflicted gunshot wound, which contradicts the multiple vehement insistences from Escridge herself that should she pass, it would not be an accident, nor would it be self-inflicted. In a message that she had sent to her business partner Samuel Reed, she states, "I did not kill myself. I did not shoot myself in the head with my own firearm. I did not overdose on my prescription meds. I did not drive off of a cliff." And this is far from the only correspondence she had before her death. There are several messages, both with the aforementioned Reed, as well as another friend of hers, Frank Milburn, a former UK military intelligence officer, in which she complains about death threats and being followed, supposedly triggered by some manner of breakthrough that she had made in her research, being surveilled by some external entity. She then goes on to claim that it is not a governmental threat that is pursuing her, but some manner of private entity with some vested financial interest in suppressing her research, all the while reiterating that under absolutely no circumstances did she kill herself. And the majority of these correspondences detail the extent to which she believed she was being harassed. In one message, Escridge mentions that it's not only her being followed, but her close friend as well, and in another, that her private information had been compromised, with her dental records having seemingly been accessed by someone in Israel, and that strangers would intel bomb her, quoting private information to her face, typically her own research or medical records, as, seemingly a coercion tactic. She also mentions receiving a great number of anonymous messages that gave her advice on how best to kill herself, or telling her to go and overdose, or, most disturbingly, that someone was waiting in her barn and to go outside and meet him. Naturally, she refused to do that. In yet another message, Escridge describes being attacked in her own home by what she referred to as a DEW, a directed energy weapon. The pictures included in this string of messages shows her hands burned, and what she claimed was a silhouette of her head on the window caused by the blinds melting, atomizing, and the residue then condensing on the glass. For the record, DEWs do actually exist and see practical application, particularly in the military. In fact, one DEW, the active denial system, is a microwave beam developed for use against protesters, designed to heat the water in the target's skin, causing incapacitating pain, which, kind of sounds somewhat similar to what Escridge described. And unfortunately, despite all of her efforts and her frequent insistence to the contrary, on June 11, 2022, at age 34, Amy Escridge allegedly committed suicide via self-inflicted gunshot wound. And as you might guess, due to all of this preceding information, there are those who claim that the official report is just completely nonsense and that this was a hit. Which, honestly, after reading through all this, I might be inclined to believe that myself. Now, While those are the oft-mentioned names when it comes to this conspiracy theory, there are two more that are typically not included, either because they don't match the established pattern or fall outside of the generally accepted incident timespan. The first of these is Ning Li, and her incident occurred in 2014, which is why she's typically not included in the list, which, tend to be within the last half decade or so. Now, Li was a physicist who, much like Escridge, specialized in anti-gravity research, claiming that there existed a practical way to produce these anti-gravity effects. She was later given a grant by the United States Department of Defense to continue her research, but no results were ever actually made public. In 2014, Lee was struck by a vehicle at the University of Alabama in Huntsville campus and suffered permanent brain damage, having had to be cared for by her son until her passing in 2021. And naturally, there are some who claim that this was not an accident and rather a targeted hit in order to suppress her research. And the second one is Matthew Allen Livelsberger, who is typically not included in the list due to him not actually being a scientist, but rather a U.S. Army Special Forces soldier. Now, the incident in question is rather well documented. On January 1st, 2025, at approximately 8:40 in the morning, Livelsberger detonated an improvised explosive device in a Cybertruck outside the Trump International Hotel, Las Vegas, before then shooting himself in the vehicle. Now, that alone is already a lot, right? But what really draws the attention is his correspondences prior to the incident. Livelsberger had sent 2 digital letters and written a manifesto, the latter of which conflicted with the former in that he expressed no suicidal intent and had planned to escape to Mexico after the attack. Within the manifesto, he had also claimed various clandestine operations and war crimes committed by the US military, believing that he was under surveillance due to this knowledge. Additionally, and most related to the topic at hand, Livelsberger claimed advanced military technology, specifically alleging that both the US and China were in possession of and had deployed gravitic propulsion systems, claiming them to be an unparalleled threat to national security. The manifesto was then later classified by the Department of Defense. And those are the most pertinent names within the conspiracy, but we're not quite done yet. We have the who, but the question still remains as to why. If we assume that this is a directed and malicious effort employed by some party, for what reason, right? Well, there are a few theories. First, it could just be coincidence. It could be that these aren't directed and malicious efforts. There are 8 billion people on the planet Earth, and roughly 2 people die every second. That is to say, just shy of 3,000 people a day over the, alleged 5-year span of these incidents. When numbers get that large, some seemingly improbable coincidences may pop up from time to time, and when you pair that with humans being a pattern-seeking species by nature, boom, now you've got a conspiracy theory, right? But what if that's not the case? Well, there's a chance that foreign powers are doing it. If we assume that there is something more coordinated here than random chance, I think the foreign powers angle is one of the more likely options. It's certainly not a new tactic to target scientists in order to hamper the enemy's development. For example, there are alleged, and in some cases proven, targetings of Iranian scientists by Israel in an attempt to stall their nuclear programs, and this could very well be a similar scenario. Or alternatively, maybe it's not foreign, but the US itself is doing it. Someone high up doesn't want this research being disclosed and is basically just tying off loose ends as they pop up. Escridge actually has a bit to say about this.
There's multiple parties looking at each other like, didn't we tell this bitch 3 years ago that we kill people for this? Is she not listening? What is she doing? She's still doing it? What? We told her we were going to kill her 3 years ago.
Honestly, I don't even think this one is too far-fetched. Do I think that the United States government would willfully target its own citizens for its own benefit? I mean, it wouldn't exactly be the first time it's happened, would it? You've got the Tuskegee experiments, MKUltra, Operation Sea Spray, Waco, Ruby Ridge. There is bountiful precedent for the government taking people and using them as fodder for whatever goal they've got in mind, or simply because they just became inconvenient. Is something of that ilk still happening in present day, present time? Honestly, I wouldn't be at all surprised. Or maybe they're not actually dead. Maybe instead they have been taken to live on a black site for some top secret project, kind of like the Manhattan Project, right? This theory is fueled by the close association of research fields among the victims, particularly that of anti-gravity. And in tandem with this, there are some theories that claim that those who had died were actually clones, with the originals having been spirited away to work on these top secret materials. I think that's unlikely. The deaths are well documented, and I think you're taking a lot of assumptions when you start claiming secret government cloning projects are involved. So not within really the realm of plausibility for me. Now, the last couple ones. I think these ones are pretty out there. I tend to be a skeptic when it comes to most unexplained phenomena, and these definitely fall under that category. The first of which is aliens are doing it. Yeah, we're starting off strong with this one. Aliens don't want to be discovered and are stifling any vectors towards their discovery as much as possible, which is why they keep targeting people involved in observation systems. If we can't see them, we can't find them, right? Like I said, I don't really believe it. Aliens might exist, but whether they have found us amidst the vast expanse of the cosmos is highly doubtful at the very least, I'd say. That said, the US government has been promising alien disclosure for a hot minute now, and surely they would never lie to their citizens, right? And finally, time travelers are doing it, or time traveling aliens are doing it. I mean, what do you want me to say, man? This one's just entirely insane, I think. They're just saying stuff at this point. However, I would be remiss in not mentioning that Escridge did, in fact, have a correspondence with Milburn in which she detailed something that sounds very much like this. She described a timeline war, where essentially future aliens come back in order to hamstring humanity. She believed that a cataclysm was due in 7 years, and that the Greys, as she referred to them, evolved after the fact. They want to ensure their own existence by going back and making sure the cataclysm happens, while another future faction would rather stay human by preventing said cataclysm, and they are now duking it out, going back into the past to kill scientists before their research bears fruit. I am fairly certain that this is just the plot of the Earth Defense Force series, but 7 years from when Escridge made this claim would be 2028, so I suppose we're gonna find out in about 2 years, won't we? Who knows? I certainly don't, but what I do know is that that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Now, do I believe in any of this? Honestly, not really. I think there is some merit to the foreign/domestic powers being responsible, and even maybe for the coincidence angle, but anything involving the more outlandish stuff is still firmly in the realm of implausible for me until we get some proof to the contrary. And the same goes with the whole anti-gravity thing as well. That said, I suppose that I should mention that the President of the United States, the orange fella, actually addressed this supposed link on April 6, 2026, calling it very concerning. And 4 days later, on April 20th, the FBI officially opened an investigation into the matter to determine whether there was a connection or not. So who knows, right? Maybe there really is something there. But that's gonna be it. I do like these sorts of things. Not necessarily the people dying part, but conspiracy theories in general. I find them fascinating even if I don't necessarily believe in them. This one was outside of my usual wheelhouse, and that definitely shows. There was a lot of detail that I left out just because it would have bloated the thing way too much. You know, you had stuff about Havana Syndrome and more on the directed energy weapons, and some of the people in this list really could have gotten their own video. Like Cassius and Escridge especially, and I guess McCasland, really could have had enough content for their own thing. I really only skimmed the surface for those. Nevertheless, thank you all for indulging me in my little side quest, and the regular programming will be back shortly. Thank you to my YouTube members, Derpuffer and Pompa Aerostar, and on the Patreon side, thank you to Paul A. It really does mean a ton. And to any intelligence agencies that may be watching, please just skip the Escridge stuff and just knock on my door and pop me, man. I promise I won't even resist. And to everybody else, I hope you enjoyed, I hope you found it interesting, or at the very least didn't find it boring, and I will see you on the next one, alright? Bye-bye.